Yeah, so tonight, basically for all you, I don't know if everyone knows who I am, but I'm a music producer, DJ, remixer. Actually playing tonight at Ruby Sky, so if you want to come out, definitely let me know. We'll get you on the list. It's going to be a crazy night. So my job is basically writing and producing music during the week, and on the weekends, DJing and playing the stuff out really loud. So, yeah. And a lot of the stuff I do is vocal based. Tonight we're actually going to focus on some instrumental stuff. I will talk about vocals, but I really wanted to present something useful to you guys. I watch a lot of seminars and things, and some guys are, this stuff's interesting but not practical, and I'm not here to waste your time. So I think tonight I want you to walk away with some really useful knowledge, and it's going to be different for everybody depending on what stage you're at and production and but tonight, we're going to talk about building templates. They're going to speed up the workflow, make it easier to draft songs, make it easier to finish projects, to get your ideas down quickly. Going to talk about production in general. Like I said, we're going to talk about vocal production, talk about layering, things like that, and also the aspects of producing that are, really focused on club music, what works in the club, in my experience, and my suggestions for if you want to be making music for nightclubs. Something recently I've been getting into is producing on the road, more out of necessity than the fact that I want to be doing that. I'm stuck more on airplanes, so I have had to learn how to get ideas down quickly and actually make use all that time, because you're spending about a third of your time almost in airplanes. So it's something a lot of producers struggle with, and it's something I've finally kind of found a way to do it properly. So I'm going to share some of my tips on that. Also, this huge thing here is my DJ mixer, and it's a MIDI controller, and it has sort of an analog mixer heart to it. And I'm going to show you really in a basic way how I do a performance, what kind of template I use, the structure. Very basic, but we're going to do that for a few minutes and just give you a glimpse into sort of the live setup. So first off, with building templates, I think it's really key to take a big chunk of your day, maybe take one day out of the week if you can, and spend that organizing everything, getting prepped. Have your samples so that you know that this kick drum is tuned to this key. It's something I don't do enough. I really would recommend spending more time doing this than I'm doing right now. But have these drum sets that work. I like to have drum sets that I know are going to translate well to the club, and I already have a good idea that I know they're going to be effective and they have the right frequencies, they have the right impact. And no one's going to sue you if you use your kick drum number 20 instead of number 3 or whatever. If you some guys only have like 3 kicks that they use, I think like Thin White Duke and a couple of those guys. But it's good to have a variety, but just have a good familiar drum set. Definitely check out like the Vengeance packs. A lot of guys use those. It's almost a cliche now, but you can spot them all in all these tracks. But don't be afraid to use that stuff. I know Wolfgang Gartner uses a lot of hip hop sample packs because it's just different and nobody can really recognize that a lot of the time. So, it's money well spent to buy those things. I know a lot of producers kind of just swap these sets, but it's good to pay for them, support these guys that are making them. I use the Dead Mouse, the Xfer, that pack, a lot of the Vengeance ones. They're all really useful. It saves you a lot of time. So I would recommend, just having good kicks and not, don't spend a month working on one kick drum. Just sample someone else's kick. And if it works in your track, great. If it doesn't, maybe you can like scoop out the low end and put a sine wave in there and tune it to the track. And there's different ways to do it. But I think being organized is key, and that definitely will speed up the whole process. So like I was saying in here, have tuned kick drums if you can, toms, other percussion, have them all in folders. With these sample packs, they're already in folders anyways, but it's good to have them in there with what key they're in, obviously what BPM. When I'm building a template, today there's a couple tracks that sort of use this template. I work in Ableton and in Pro Tools, and everything's color-coded. I've set the levels, so when I start the session, everything's like at -6 dB or more, so I have more headroom to work with. I have certain starter presets with sort of my own default settings on them, so I'm not sort of painting myself into a corner with a certain setting. I'll have a lot of plugins on there, but I'll make them inactive off the bat and then say, okay, cool, I want to sidechain this, or I want to filter this, it's set at predetermined levels, and I can make a plugin active immediately and not have to go searching for it. So a big part of this is streamlining your whole process so that your kick is routed so that the side chain's already set up, that you already have your effects in there. So you've got, typically I'll do like a small room, a medium room, a really long delay, maybe a ping pong delay. Those will always be in the track. And I used to think it was really kind of cliche to do a template. And I thought, that would just make formulaic music. But if you do it right and you leave yourself enough room, they're really helpful. And with a lot of the stuff in here, you can see these little markers. I have it every 16 bars. I'll put a marker in, or 32. I do everything in these 8-bar chunks, and then typically there's 2 breakdowns. I think in this example, yeah, there's 2. And you can set that to a controller thing in Ableton, so you can jump to those sections immediately. And by having this structure, you can break that template if you want, obviously, but it's just a starting point. So you get in there, and it helps you just sort of get that big picture perspective. So I'll build the track up, and then I will sort of tear it down and begin adding more things in. It's sort of a long, tedious process, but I'll basically come up with a loop, maybe an 8-bar loop, might be a 4-bar loop, maybe even shorter. And I'll sort of, once I get what I think is really solid, and there's, even a good melodic hook in there or whatever, I'll loop that and then just start cutting holes in that arrangement. So, color coding it, making sure everything's in groups is really key. I think, especially in Ableton, the way to use groups, it's just nice because, you have everything's in the same color. You're routing things to the bus, so you can have a little compressor on your bus. So let's see what we have in here. So in drums, I've got a bunch of samples in here. There's a compressor, multi-band dynamics to kind of even things out. There's a high-pass filter to kind of get rid of the low end. This is for the drums. It's all drums other than the kick drum. Saturator, which is kind of like a little limiter on there. And a lot of these groups will have like a saturator or something else. If you're working in Logic, maybe you want just the regular limiter in there or adaptive limiter. Just ways to kind of control the mix. So I'll have things like that pre-set up and maybe just make them inactive. And then when I hear that, something's clipping, I can just pop it right on. So in general, you can see in here that I'm working in stems. There's drums, vocals, which actually aren't even in this track, synth, effects. The kick is on its own group. There's a kick sidechain also, which is a little bit different. With this kick, it's like a really short one, so it's to feed the sidechain. It's a shorter kick, so I have a little more room to play with it instead of this longer kick, which is the main kick that you hear in the track. So I'll go through in a minute and solo some of these so we can hear them. But right now, I think we're just still focusing on templates. What I was saying, with faders, having them down at -6 or -8 just gives you that breathing room. So later on, you can pull them up if you want to. But basically, I'm gaining all of that volume back on the other side of the fader. So on the master, I've got a trim thing that's all the tracks are down -8, which is a lot. I just had some problems with clipping, I guess. And at that point, you can either bring it back with utility, add some extra gain there. Most of it is just in the main limiter on the bus. The input's kind of cranked in there. Just as long as, it's sort of a brick wall limiter. I'll show more about that in a minute. But Ozone is really tolerant of pushing that input drive. And this session that I'm going to show you that we're in right now is mainly about 90% Ableton stock plugins. The only one being Ozone, just because I'm familiar with it, is the only third-party one that's on there. Another big thing is pre-naming your tracks. I always get caught, I don't want to get put in this bubble of every track's going to have the, certain kind of bass line or certain kind of percussion driving it. So maybe I'll say, you can get creative. You can have multiple templates too. It doesn't have to be one for everything. I'll have one template for drafting a pop song that's, 3.5 minutes long. or I'll have one that's already at a 7-minute arrangement for a club track. So you can have multiple ones to choose from. You don't have to lock everything in and feel that you're stuck in a corner. What else do we have here? Yeah, naming them is definitely key ahead of time, especially when you start creating regions. And I just use the color to sort of simplify things and make sure that everything's in the right order, in an order that makes sense. So, I really have the drums up top, moving down to some of the key elements like vocals, synth, effects. The lower priority things like white noise, that stuff I have farther down the chain. And everybody kind of color codes their things differently. I've seen a few guys, I know Cascade's engineer sort of showed me this system where it was like bass was always purple and the keyboards are always pink and the drums are blue. So I took some of that. But I spend most of my time in Pro Tools, and I'm starting to do more stuff in Ableton now, but the color palette is different, so I can't use the same colors. So I'm trying to figure out a way to like change it all over. But you just find your system of working, and it's really key if you want to be doing like a draft a day. There's no way I'd be able to do a draft a day without an efficient template set up. So when I'm in album mode, that's what I'll do, is I'll get in the studio, wake up 7:30 a.m., have breakfast, drink a ridiculous amount of coffee, and then just plow through the day. Don't, not check any emails, leave my phone out of the studio, and just write as fast as I can. And then I don't really listen to that for a couple weeks. Maybe it's more like a day and a half. It'll be a day. I'll sleep on it. The next morning I'll come in, revise a few things, bounce it down, and then just put it in a folder in iTunes and let it sit. And a lot of times I'll come back to it and say, I don't even remember writing this. It's crazy. All right, so moving on to general production. Like I said, draft a day works really well. I don't have a team of people. I have different vocalists I'll bring in for projects and songwriters, sometimes other co-producers, but typically it's me, and I have to engineer everything. So, guys like Cascade maybe have 3 or 4 writers, and there's a lot more people at work in these teams of people. David Guetta obviously he's more of an executive producer, and he has a huge team of people working for him that sort of rotates in and out. So I keep it simple, just because I'm a kind of control freak with the tracks, and I have instrumentals that I'll make, and I'll leave sort of definitely enough room in there so there's a lead voicing. I might sing a melody or like a guideline thing on top of it, but it usually never turns out to be the top line. I'll do a beat and a chord progression, a lead element, a bass line, a supporting arpeggio, and that's when it's at its fullest. Typically I'll leave it a little more open so there isn't some lead in there, so there's enough breathing room for a vocalist to come in. Because immediately if it's too complicated, a vocalist tries to sing on it, they don't hear anything in their head, and that's because the track's too dense and there's already a voice in there somewhere, even though it's not a human voice. So that's key, I feel, and so I get these very basic arrangements done. They all have structure, which I think is key, and that goes back to the template thing. If you don't have structure in your drafts, it's so much harder to come back later and put the structure back in. And when you have the vocals done, because they're going to be like, well, where's the chorus to sing on? Where's the verse? And even if it's instrumental, I still call it verse, chorus, verse. I still use that structure. You could almost think of it like A, B, A sections, if you want to call it that instead. So that's really important. And so with an album cycle, I'll do this draft a day, maybe come up with 60 or 70 drafts. And in the end, there's only 12 songs that really make the cut. But I won't develop all of them, obviously. I kind of know which ones really jump out to me, and I'll shop them to a vocalist. I sort of cast that voice, who's going to be right for the track. Like In the Air with Angela McCluskey, which is the new single. I heard this, just the right kind of match with her voice. She has all this kind of sawdust in her voice. And I thought, this is going to be a perfect match for this kind of lusher soundtrack in the background. A lot of times what will happen is I'll go in and actually rework the whole track around the vocal, because they may bring a different kind of cadence to their vocal. They may hit it rhythmically in a certain way. And I'll go, oh man, all the instruments are wrong for this. We need to go back and build a track that supports the vocal. So I think you get really good results doing that, and it's tedious, but it's definitely worth it in the end. I think it's hard to go back. I just don't like it to have it sound like somebody slapped a vocal on top of it. And there's some artists that I won't name that it just sounds like they did that and they didn't build the track around them. But it's got to be about the vocal to me. Some tracks, the vocals is a much more minor role in the whole production. But for me, it's the star of the show, and you've got to build everything to be appropriate and to support that part. In terms of other parts, when I'm producing, I'm really big on making melodic parts that move the beat, that kind of create the engine room. So what I'll do is I'll actually go in and generate little sine waves or square waves for different octaves, or I'll just play it on the keyboard, and then use those little bits to kind of create arpeggios that move forward. So everything's in key. Your kick drum's in key, your toms are in key. You've got even higher octaves that are just doing little popcorn, like a little lead sound that's just rhythmically pushing it forward. So you're swinging these little melodic bits, but there isn't all this percussion sort of confusing the mix. So I like to layer that with some non-tuned stuff too, because it can sound a little clinical if it's just these little bleeps and melodies and things. So it's good to have some stuff that's a little bit of dissonance in there. So I'll dive in a minute and show you a little bit of how I made this track. And this is there's 2 sessions I'm going to show you tonight. And this is stuff I worked with this week. No one's heard it, so it's all fresh. And I wanted it to be kind of fresh in my mind for you guys so I could show you what was going through my head when I made it a couple days ago. A lot of the stuff I've just totally forgotten from like 3 years ago, so I'm not going to show you those sessions. Using these basic waveforms is definitely key. I feel like you can hear what's happening with your plugins better. Everybody does like the white noise trick to kind of fill up the spectrum of sounds. And it just helps to balance things in the mix. You can see where you want to place them. You can kind of feel it a little better. So I always say simple sounds and complex treatments. And we'll see that in a minute. I actually make little pitch charts to show the different octaves when I want to see, or I'll look at other people's tracks and say, oh, like this kick drum, all the energy is at 40 hertz, and that's right in tune with it. Sometimes the kick drum doesn't have to be in tune, it sounds great. And I don't understand why that is, but it can sound really good and have a lot more space in the mix if it's all tuned and it's at that root note of the key. I'll do tricks like I'll have 1 octave lower on one side, 1 octave higher on the other, and it creates this really cool width. And I use that for like chord progressions and things. If you know, like producers like EDX use that a lot, and it just kind of creates a little drama. You don't actually hear the octave difference. It just sounds like a bigger chord. So there's little tricks like that. And then you can use that idea of contrast in a lot of different ways. You can have a lo-fi plugin on one side. You can detune something just a little bit on one side, not just an octave, but a much smaller increment. That's one way to do it. When I'm producing, I will I really like the idea of contrast. So I'll swing stuff. I'll use like Logic 16C a lot, and it's like the basic Ableton swing 60% one. I think I use that sometimes. That's definitely key. And then I'll basically contrast that with a straight 16th right in the middle, like a little center hi-hat. But I feel like if you put that hi-hat in first, it's really hard to get the groove. Like you need to kind of build this groove and then prop it up with this middle hi-hat. And that's sort of like the tent pole for the swing that pushes it forward. When I'm mixing, I'm always kind of mixing on the go. And so I'll have just a little bit of compression. I'll have an SSL compressor on the main mix. Just sort of like a couple dB. Just lightly touching the compressor and then getting hammered into a brick wall limiter. But during a lot of the process, I will just have the compression going and not a ton of limiting. And maybe I'll do, really push it later on. But while I'm monitoring, I'll just, it'll be relatively quiet. It's getting some, gain reduction from the compressor, but I'll just turn the monitors up a little louder. All right. Well, we can jump in here too. I mean, there's more advanced stuff. It's not as important, but like utilizing controllers. I love this controller by Korg, and sometimes the cheap stuff is like way better than some of the $1,000 equipment. So I'll use things like that to create envelopes, and obviously map the knobs to a lot of things. Ableton's really good. It's so fluid with all the controller automation. So I think that's a lot of talking for now. Let's get into some music. So let's listen to this just for a little bit. It's very basic. All right. So that's like the first build, the first break. So it's very basic, it's like a sort of a sawtooth chord progression, and I like to just play this progression. It just sounds so cool with the filter coming in and out. It's actually overloading the computer a little bit here, but so I'm going to break down all the tracks for you guys so you can see this. The main kick is a Vengeance kick. Let's go in there. And then there's a side chain, which is a shorter one. It's like a 16th note instead of a quarter or an eighth. It's sort of a truncated version of it, which is it's not super different. And then I have some other sort of drums programmed in here that sort of some toms, things that drive it forward. So just some hi-hats. Another Vengeance clap. And that's just some stock sounds from Ableton. And I think those are swung a little bit. Some more Vengeance. And these are all, pretty heavily high-passed, a lot of them, just so there's room for the kick. And there's some wideners applied to them, like I'll use simple delay to kind of widen things. What else is here? Okay, so that's an example of using sort of a percussive but melodic element. So this is sort of it's very simple. I think it's a little sine wave. And that's being swung. Yeah, to a logic swing. Okay. And that big filter sweep was just something on the master. It was kind of a fun little filter. I really like auto filter. And the vocals are just me saying yeah. That's all, just a percussive thing. And there's a little chord in there. I really like the vocoder in Ableton, and I'll use that to create percussion sounds out of other things. That it just does this cool thing with noise and with chords and beyond your typical vocoder applications. Let's see what else we have in here. So it's a hi-hat going through a vocoder. All the synths are coming through operator on this, just sort of the standard Ableton synth, very basic. There's the side chain. What else do we have in here? And oh yeah, the vocoder's on the bus. That's where it is. So there's two vocoders. One is adding noise, and one is creating the chord. And a little EQ, a little saturator. Saturator is so cool. It's like you can just push it, you know, if you want. You know, you can drive it. It's just really handy plugin that I totally overlooked until someone showed it to me. What else? Let's look at the synths. What else? Let's look at the synths. So arrangement-wise, you know, I'll bring these synths in, and then I kind of fold the chords. So I'll loop them. So it's like one chord, maybe two chords, and then the full progression is in the breakdown when it has all this room to breathe. So there's a couple variations in there. That's two different octaves. There's one chord that's being looped. That's just filter automation on there. And this is the sort of the more open progression. So that's that part. So there's these two parts. You know, you've got this sort of, a lot of times I feel like you keep this glue and this sort of momentum with one note bass lines. So when it comes back in, it's just one note. And then in the breakdown, you can go all progressive and do all this different stuff. But it has this drive to it that just sort of, it emphasizes the kick drum, emphasizes the track, just pushes it forward. So that's with the progression. Here's it with just one note, I think. And let's look at the build here for a second. So these are still works in progress, just so you know, they're not final tracks. But so there's a lot of ARPs in there. Let's take a look at these that kind of move things along in the build. And this is a lead, but it's still pushing it along. 2 octaves again. Bass line. And you can just do such interesting things with the tension with bass, you know, with longer bass notes versus short ones. Those short ones are basically, you know, right in time with the lead. And it sort of goes along with this rule. One of these mixers, Jack Joseph Puig, actually told me, he said, your ear can only really hear 3 distinct things. So, you know, if you have a chord and a bass line and an arpeggio, you know, you can have really 3 distinct elements that can play off each other. But it's going to be a lot more effective if you stack things. So like here, you know, there's 2 ARPs, 1 bass line, a chord that's being looped, some other bleeping percussion sounds. And you wouldn't want much more than that, you know, a little percussion. it's only a handful of things, and they're actually kind of taking turns too. When some of the bass goes out, then this siren comes in. So you're kind of swapping things, and I feel like guys like Wolfgang Gartner, they get this great sound too because they don't have everything coming in at once. They're alternating. It's sort of like flipping through an FM dial, and they can occupy these different parts of the spectrum and get all these different sounds because they kind of go back and forth on these sounds, which are really cool. So another tension trick, since the club stuff is about building tension and release, it's the chords are looping here. They go from this progression to being folded down like this. So I use that to contrast with the arpeggio. So I love having an arpeggio that stays the same and then the chord changes, or have the chord stay the same and the arpeggio moves and alternates. Just cool little contrast tricks. And there's the obligatory siren build in there that I just always seem to have to put in the tracks for some reason. Let's take a listen to that. Let's listen to the effects for a minute. I always have to have white noise, always have to have the siren build. It just works, and I don't know. I can't get away from it. Oh, so this is a couple different things. There's a white noise that's being tuned to the key of the track, just using EQ. And we'll find that in a minute. Regular white noise, tuned white noise, and sort of a pitch siren thing, a very simple, just one oscillator, one saw, I think, with like a chorus effect on it. So let's hear that with the other elements. So I try to do some fun stuff with automation. I don't want to leave. I want some of the DJs to have a little room so they could do like this. Want to let them have some fun with your track. It look like they're busy doing something up there. All right, so where are we? Let's get back to the agenda here. So when I'm doing these tracks, the instrumental stuff's fun, and you can fill in sort of a lead voice. And to me, it still has to have a lead. If you don't have a vocal, something else should be that lead element. But I really think it's important to figure out what's the main idea. What's the hook? What's really gonna kind of set in people's minds and make them want to hear track over and over again. And if there isn't something that you feel is addictive, just keep pushing for it or start again from scratch. There's got to be something unique about it. I think the main problem that I hear in a lot of demos and a lot of promos that I get is the track's good. It's not that the track's bad, but the track isn't a standout or something that I have to hear again and again. And it takes a long time to get to that point, and something I still struggle with all the time. And we all get writer's block. We all, have our struggles, but I only release a selective amount of music. There's 80 drafts for the album, but I have to have 12 that I actually develop. So a lot of stuff kind of gets left on the cutting room floor. So I think it's really important, don't be too precious with your ideas. Just keep writing every day. And 2 hours a day is what I used to do, and it's not enough to do 2 hours a day. It's a good place to start, but you want to get to your point, if you're doing a day job, whatever, you can wean yourself off the day job. I had to save up a year's salary to be able to do that, and it took a long time. But you don't want to just switch cold turkey immediately. I worked as like a consultant for a little while, did a little side gig, and went from full-time job to part-time job, and then did music full-time. So it took a long time. But it was a couple years of transition. But there were so many years where I just did remixes, and I was working a day job, and I was brewing coffee at midnight, and it gets to really affect your health. So I would just get sick more often. So I decided I just can't do this anymore. So you have to take that leap eventually. but it's worth it. If you put that time in, I still am a firm believer of the 10,000 hour thing. I don't know if you guys have read that Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, I think. It's almost cliche. Everyone's probably heard of it by now. But you put your 10,000 hours in, which is basically 3 hours a day for 10 years, I think. And you put your time in, and if you spend that much time on it, you have to be good. Trust me. I started doing music when I was 12, and if I wasn't a little bit proficient at it, I'd be really sad. If I put this, 15 years and whatever. But moving along, really important with all these tracks, as you see the way I've organized them, keep everything in these stems, keep it organized so you don't get lost in your production cycle. Really important to be able to explain what track's doing what's going on. With everything color-coded, you can have this easy reference so your eye can jump immediately. I know drums are blue, I know, bass is brown, whatever. You can move quickly. If you're organized and your left brain, it doesn't have to get into the mix. You can get those creative right brain ideas down much quicker. Take care of the plumbing, as some people say, ahead of time, all the routing. And the same thing goes too if you have a lot of analog hardware. It's really going to break your creative focus if you have to go into the patch bay and mess around with something's not connected. So I think workflow is key. Find a DAW that you love. Find a control surface that you like that speeds things up. This works for me. I use this in Pro Tools and Ableton, and it's just so nice. It saves you those keystrokes, makes it a little less tedious. Build that routine, and as I was saying, the ear can only hear really 3 distinct things, so you got to make those 3 things count. And a lot of what I'll do is I'll just try different ideas, try things, throw them out. I'll build things up, tear them apart. It's this constant process of like building a sculpture, kind of. And with the vocal stuff, it's interesting because moving on to this, I do a lot of I'll hum stuff and then really hard tune it. So I'll never use that. Sometimes I'll pull it down in the background, but I just hear things. It's sort of like the muse is telling you to play this lead or to add this element. When you have that workflow in such a good process, you can move from one thing to the next and just work very quickly. And so I'll put even though I don't have the vocalist with me, or I don't know who I want to sing on the track yet, I'll say, okay, I have this melody idea in my mind, and let's just get it in there. And I don't have perfect pitch, so I do need auto-tune. I have sung on some of my tracks, and I need a lot of auto-tune. So nothing wrong with that, though. Get the ideas down. I think there's a lot of people who, without these tools, may not be able to express their ideas the same way. So don't be afraid to use all the tools you have available. And I definitely do that with with DJing. I use Ableton. I used to use vinyl and CDJs, and I don't miss it at all. I'll never go back. But there is no cheating. It's whatever you can do to kind of express your idea, whether you're doing production or DJing and performing. With vocals, I don't have a session to show you, but I think I was going to talk a little bit about my process and what I try to do to make vocals stand out. A big part of it is layering. So I'll start with that lead vocal, and if you have too many layers, it's going to blur the mix. But I'll have them do all these different takes. So I'll say, all right, do a whisper take, do a take standing 10 feet back from the mic, do one take eating the mic, do one take enunciating everything a little differently, maybe hitting the timing of the syllables a little differently, one take yelling, all these different, as many variations as you think you can do. A lot of times it doesn't work. And you just say, okay, well, just these layers are effective, and any of these other ones, like the whisper take, is very hit or miss. And a lot of times I don't use it. A lot of times just sort of singing as quietly as possible, so still having tone and a tune to it is really effective. But sometimes the whisper take is great. With Angela McCluskey, with a single In the Air, she didn't need any layers. I think there's a few layers in there, but we tried to do harmonies, and her voice was just too rich. There's just too much going on. There's such a sharp timbre to her voice that I could add a couple little harmonies, but nothing like this wall of a chorus. So you just got to experiment. And what I'll do a lot of times is just have the singer. I'm not really good at explaining to them like, oh, sing this harmony. I want you to sing a third up or a third down. A lot of guys will do that. It just doesn't work that way in the studio. I don't have a vocal booth. I have them sing behind my shoulder. And I just say, sing what's in your head, and and then I'll go back and actually change notes in the harmony if I need to. But some guys will play out the harmony on the keyboard, and it just doesn't work. It feels so sterile to do it like that. So, maybe they hit a few wrong notes. Maybe Auto-Tune pushes them into some notes that I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I bring it into Melodyne and say I want some more subtle changes. A lot of different ways to do it, but I just try to go with the gut and work quickly. And I just don't have that much access to the vocalists sometimes too. Like they're in town for a day or 2 days, or they're distracted or something, and you have to get the best performance out of them that you can and move on. And a lot of times, like I just did a track with Tegan and Sarah for the new album, and I still haven't met them. So we worked remotely, and I just kind of trusted that their engineer would do a good job, and it worked out really well. It's a really great track, but a lot of times you don't have the luxury of having them in the studio with you. So you have to work around that. Sometimes I have a vocalist sing over Skype, and that's one way to get the idea across. But and you definitely have to have them sing on a lot of different tracks. Like if it's just one song, you can be like, oh my God, this was a terrible idea. Like, I can't believe I picked this vocalist. And then the third song they sing on is gold. So, I try to have them sing 3 or 4. I shop it around. If they're not excited about it, I'll send them 10 songs and they'll pick 3 or 4. And if they're not excited about it, then I've picked the wrong person, or we just come back later with another pool of tracks. They've really got to be inspired by the material. They have to hear something in their head, and the drafts have to be open enough, like I was saying earlier, that they can hear that lead melody in their head. Their muse can tell them, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to sing. Like, they're not just consciously choosing it.